It's Fill Your Plate Now, where every bite brings you closer to the farm gate and further from what's unhealthy. Now here's your hosts, Julie and Tammy, helping you live well by filling your plate well.
Welcome to another episode of Fill Your Plate Now. And today we're going to be discussing one of the longest running popular diets out there, the Mediterranean diet. And to help us with the Mediterranean diet, we brought in an expert, Elena Paravantes, and she is a registered dietitian nutritionist, an expert in the Mediterranean diet. She's the creator of olivetomato.com, one of the first and top online resources for the authentic Mediterranean diet. And she's authored the best-selling book, The Mediterranean Diet Cookbook for Beginners, which has sold over 100,000 copies. So we have a great expert to help us with this. In addition to this, she has spoken and written numerous publications, and she is living in Athens, Greece, and today joins us from Athens. Welcome, Elena. It's great to have you today.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And, I'll just dive right into this. I think maybe we should give our listeners a little background on how the Mediterranean diet first got started. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we know that the Mediterranean diet is a diet that people followed naturally in certain parts of the world, the Mediterranean, but how they discovered this diet is more by accident, let's say. So after the war in the 1950s, U.S. researchers through the Rockefeller Foundation went to certain countries to examine their living conditions because there was poverty. People were going through difficult times after the war. And they went to the Greek island of Crete, where they noticed that the men there who did not have a westernized diet, they did not have meat, they did not have butter, they kind of followed a almost vegan diet with a lot of vegetables and greens and a lot of olive oil. And they actually noted that these people were very healthy. There was almost no heart disease present in this population. And they wondered how this could be, considering and comparing with men who lived in the US who had, consumed the meat and potato diet. So that made people a bit curious of what was going on there. And then fast forward a few years later, we have the famous 7-country study where physiologist Ansel Keys studied again this diet. And he noted that in areas such as Italy and Greece, people were living long lives, even though they were consuming so much fat in the form of olive oil. So study after study, they noted and they gathered information about how this diet, what was it made out of? Like what were people consuming? They were consuming mainly vegetables because meat was a luxury. Sugar was a luxury. Butter was a luxury. These things were not available in these areas. And so fast forward to the early 1990s, researchers from Greece and from other countries, along with Ansel Keys, developed what we now know as the Mediterranean Diet Pyramid. And so that's how the diet started. Now, we don't know if it existed before the war. So we know that at that moment in time, the 1950s and 1960s, in the Mediterranean, people were eating this way and they were very healthy and they lived long lives.
So, Elena, what I'm so excited about is that we're talking to someone that's an expert in this area, that you're international. Here you are in Athens, and we're interviewing you here in Arizona. So this is pretty special to have this conversation with you. And one of the other thing that strikes me, based on what you just presented, is this is one of the longest running diets and probably predates, World War II. What do you attribute that, well, and maybe the answer is right there, what do you attribute this longevity of the diet in terms of how long it's lasted?
Well, it was a diet that is followed by real people. Nobody develop this diet. There wasn't a doctor or researchers. It kind of naturally occurred in an area. So we know because of that, that it is a realistic and sustainable diet because real people followed it. So having said that, it is I hate to use the word easy, but it is a easy to follow way of eating. It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. That's what makes it so long lasting. You can basically follow it forever. The second part is that it includes all food groups, no processed foods, but all food groups. So anybody can follow this diet from any part of the world if they're consuming local fruit and vegetables, fresh food that exists in every area of the world. So it's not something special like only meat or, specialized products that we see today. And the third thing is that it is the most studied diet with the most health benefits that are that we see at study after study. So they confirm these health benefits through hundreds of studies. There is no other diet that has so many studies supporting it for various conditions.
Yeah, I did notice that there is a Mediterranean food guide pyramid now, but Elena, you forgot one of the most important parts. I saw that you can have dark chocolate in limited quantities. I mean, who would not love a diet that has dark chocolate in it, right? But so for the listeners, could you kind of go through some of the basic foods that, you utilize frequently that are in the Mediterranean diet?
So on the base of the pyramid are, we would say authentic. Now we're talking about the authentic Mediterranean diet are the vegetables. If I had to describe the Mediterranean diet in one sentence, it would be vegetables and olive oil, because most of the main meals are vegetable based. So you have vegetables, seasonal. So, in the summer, you'll have the tomatoes, but not in the winter. You have these vegetables cooked with olive oil, usually cooked with some sort of tomato sauce that they may have preserved from the summer. And we also have olive oil. That is the main source of fat. We use it for cooking, sauteing, baking even. You have a lot of those, known olive oil cakes. We also use olive oil, of course, in salads, but we also fry with it. Of course, frying isn't something that you do, on an everyday basis, but it is used for that. And we can talk about olive oil later if you'd like. Then we have greens. Greens are I give them a special category because leafy greens are very popular and very rich in antioxidants. And so I would call them one of the superfoods of the Mediterranean diet. So we call these leafy greens horta, which is a generic term for greens, like weeds even. So we use that, we lightly boil that, consume it with olive oil and lemon. Another big food group are beans. Beans are consumed 2 to 3 times a week, and they are a great source of protein within the Mediterranean diet, considering that meat is not that often consumed. Now, going into the meat, red meat is consumed about once a week. And if we want to be really authentic, I would say once a month. So poultry is mainly the main meat that is consumed more commonly within the week. Fish is consumed once or twice a week, usually small fatty fish like sardines and anchovies, which are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. We have dairy, we have yogurt, the world famous Greek yogurt, and cheese. These are the main sources of dairy in the diet. And cheese in particular is, because there are so many vegetable dishes as main courses, cheese is, let's say, the protein part of that dish. So almost everything is accompanied with cheese. And finally, we have, grains, bread. Usually that will be whole grain, or we also have what we call barley rusks, which is dry bread made with whole grain barley flour.
So, Elena, check my pronunciation, but I think you said leafy greens is called corta. Did I say?
Horta, yeah, like
Corta.
with an H, like a silent H.
Horta, okay.
Yes,
I love
exactly.
that.
Perfect.
So now I can
Perfect.
say Yuma, Arizona is the horta capital of the world when it comes to and saying it in English, leafy greens. So that is so exciting. And we grow a lot of leafy greens here in Arizona. But the next question I have, and in many ways you've answered that, people with a healthy lifestyle is probably the number one. But are there, different, health conditions that people ought to consider in order to come onto this diet or to incorporate it into their life? Or is it kind of across the board?
You're right. It's across the board.
Okay.
I mean, studies have shown that, this was the original heart healthy diet. So that's what they were studying back then. People literally, there was no heart disease at all. But more and more research is coming out. And we know for a while now that this diet is an ideal diet for people who actually have diabetes. So it's not just prevention, it's actually people who do have diabetes. This is a moderate carbohydrate diet, even though many people may think it's high carbohydrate because they think of pasta and pizza. But it actually isn't, because there are so many vegetables in this diet and olive oil that carbohydrates have a lower percentage than what one would think. But research does show that it provides a good control of blood sugar. We also know that this type of diet protects from certain types of cancer. And more recent research shows that it can improve our cognitive function and even protect from Alzheimer's disease. And we do see more research about mood, food and mood, and the Mediterranean diet has been associated with fewer symptoms of depression, let's say. So the research is there. It is a diet for almost everything because it fights inflammation. That is the main power of this diet, let's say.
And that's something I think a lot of people struggle with, is inflammation. And I always thought it was just the sunshine and the beautiful area that made everybody so happy there. But but I did notice, the grains are more at the top of the pyramid, where they used to really be at the base. And with so many vegetables, is there a lot of prep involved then when you're eating a Mediterranean diet?
Well, I think that is one of the misconceptions. Many recipes we often see regarding the Mediterranean diet appear to have many ingredients, very complex. Those type of recipes that you may know or have at a restaurant, those are special occasion recipes. Now, at the everyday meals of the Mediterranean diet are rather simple. They're flavorful, but simple. So, for example, it could be one of the dishes that I make is cauliflower, where we braise the cauliflower in a pot with some olive oil and tomato paste. And you cook that. And the active prep time is very little. And then you have a main course, which is the cauliflower. And you accompany that with some bread and with some cheese. So I'm a mother, I work, so I make these type of recipes, these vegetable casseroles, as I call them, because you can actually consume them the next day. They actually taste better. So you save all this time. And sometimes I'll use frozen vegetables, frozen peas, or frozen green beans. Those are in my freezer. And I make the same type of casserole with the difference that I use frozen vegetables. But other than that, I mean, it's not something that takes a long time. And if people really look at the traditional recipes, they'll realize that.
We've made reference to it twice now, the Med Diet Pyramid. And several years ago, we wrote an article. Actually, since then, we've written more than one on the Med Diet in the desert or here in Arizona. And literally, every one of the layers of the Med Diet Pyramid, we can replicate or respond or have that food group here in Arizona, including the fish. A lot of what we raise is the tilapia. So I'm hoping, Elena, that you're proud of us for trying to do that. But then I have a real practical, down-to-earth kind of question. Is this diet expensive? Is it
First of all,
expensive to follow?
I didn't realize that you could grow all these, that you can replicate the diet over there. That is great. It makes things so much easier for people living in that area. Again, that's a misconception I find with the if a Mediterranean diet is expensive or even a healthy diet in that sense. Recently, I'm very active on TikTok. I have a large following there, and I basically put on a plate just some tomatoes, some cheese, some bread, and people were commenting that this is a luxury, or this is, and when we look at and we take and measure how much something like that costs, just some local seasonal vegetables, some bread, and some cheese, it is cheaper than buying processed foods that were frozen foods. And as long as you are able to be local and seasonal, not trying to buy, for example, imported artichokes, for example, from the Mediterranean. It doesn't have to be from the Mediterranean. It should be local, because that is another, that takes me to the next point, that the Mediterranean diet is considered an example of a sustainable diet for our planet. And that can only happen if we do eat locally and seasonally. But if we do measure the cost of ingredients to make a typical Mediterranean meal, the way I describe it, it is absolutely affordable.
That's great. That's great. Really good information. And, when I was doing a little research on the Mediterranean diet, as a registered dietitian, I knew some of the basic principles, but I just wanted to dive in a little deeper. And it came up as one of the top diets, as you mentioned, to help with inflammation, to help with diabetes, to help with, reduce risk of heart disease, and even with weight loss. And, with some of these areas, how long, in your experience, does it take someone following this diet to start seeing some of the positive effects of it?
Immediate positive effects, as with any change in our diet. When we start eating more fresh food and less processed, we'll feel, more energetic. We'll feel less bloated because we're going to be eating more fiber, drinking more water. In terms of after about a month, if you do have issues with cholesterol or high blood pressure, you will see a drop in that. In terms of weight loss, of course, as registered dietitians, we all know that calories count. So while the Mediterranean diet has been shown to be a diet that helps maintain a healthy weight and reduce the waist circumference, so tummy fat, that you would see depending on your calorie intake. So you will see those changes. And then longer term, you will see more improvement of some of those measures in relation to heart disease, for example.
What I love about the diet is the variety of the foods that you can eat. It is absolutely not a boring diet. And just having had the privilege and opportunity to study it in the past, it's like, oh my gosh, we can do everything here in Arizona. Of course, we add a little bit more beef to it, just an FYI. but even then, we have so many lean cuts in our beef that I'm excited. But knowing this diversity, it's not a boring diet. But are there any negatives to it?
I would say if just from being in Greece, where people, follow this diet, one of the things that they may worry about is that too much olive oil? Because the Mediterranean diet is not a low-fat diet. If you don't change the majority, if you're still eating processed foods and adding the olive oil that is required to see benefits within the Mediterranean diet, and that is about 3 to 4 tablespoons a day per person, you will gain weight because you're getting more calories. But if you do follow a Mediterranean diet, consuming the vegetables with the olive oil, the calories balance out as long as you're not eating, processed carbohydrates. That is probably one negative that I can mention. The other point I want to make, it's not exactly negative, but there is a misrepresentation of the Mediterranean diet, particularly outside of Greece. And it gives this impression that it requires a lot of cooking, like you mentioned, or it's expensive, or it's only for people, who have all this time, or it's a diet. it's not a diet, it's a way of living where you actually eat this way for the rest of your life, which is very flexible.
That's great. And I have to tell you a confession here. I wanted to see how easy it was to follow for our family. And so I was trying to follow along with some of the basic foods that were in the Mediterranean diet. It felt really good. Went for this really long hike, came back and was craving salt. And we had, heaven forbid, potato chips in our pantry. And I grabbed a couple handfuls. And about 30 minutes later, I felt horrible after not having any of that stuff and things, but and felt so much better going back to, as you said, eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains and things like that. And we do eat a little more red meat here than probably you do over there. But you mentioned red meat can be a part of the Mediterranean diet. Is it more of a portion control thing or certain cuts that you think are preferred over others? How can you fit red meat into the Mediterranean diet?
So the portion control is important. So what I recommend to individuals who they're used to eating meat with every meal. So what we try and do in the beginning to transition to a more authentic Mediterranean diet or to a Mediterranean diet in general is to just consume smaller amounts. So, okay, maybe you're consuming red meat once or twice a week. Make it a side dish instead of the main course of the meal. So that way you're still getting some of that meat, but you're getting mostly vegetables now. Having said that, when we talk about cuts, if you look at traditional Mediterranean dishes, and the authentic Mediterranean diet originated mainly in Greece and southern Italy. So when you look at those two areas, and you look at meat dishes, you will see that they are very rich and fatty. And these dishes, again, were special occasion dishes. So for example, on Easter, we eat lamb. We don't eat light cuts or lean cuts. That is because meat was so rare. But if you are eating meat on a more regular basis, so there it would make sense to eat leaner cuts and smaller portions.
So to me, historically, part of the use of red meat in the diet has to do with the historical perspective on it as well. And I mean, where you live, you're by the sea, so we should be eating fish. A lot of this is geographic in influence in some instances, it seems like. I mean, not all of the reasons, but when you think about fish and chicken, I think that was the other meat protein that you mentioned earlier that makes it sense to this. And the question I'm about to ask you, I feel like you've already answered because you had said that this is a lifestyle. It's not a diet. It's not a diet in the way we typically look at diets. So it is one of those diets that we can do for an extended period of time.
Yes, I mean, and the word diet, it comes from the Greek word dieta, which means way of life. So it actually is a way of life in the sense that you eat with the seasons. Food is related to, like you said, location, history. For example, in Greece, people fasted from animal products over 200 days a year. And I still do this as well. It's a religious fast, but you don't have to be religious to do this. So automatically, you're becoming almost a vegan for a big portion of the year. And that is also part of the lifestyle. But another thing is the actual act of eating. People here usually eat together, even if it's a quick lunch. Sleeping, naps. I've talked about this, and there's a lot of research behind it. Now, realistically, even here in Athens, it's a big city. People don't take naps like they used to, but we can incorporate quiet time, or we can take naps on the weekend. So those are other lifestyle practices. Walking, like physical activity that's not like organized exercise classes, just generally walking, doing housework. These all are part of the Mediterranean diet, let's say.
Interesting. And I know you did mention, location, and so how the diet had evolved with the foods that were available. And in the diet, the one thing I did see is there was a fair amount of goat cheese. But you also had told me earlier that your cow milk cheeses can also be a part of the diet, which makes it even easier for me to follow too. Could you talk a little bit about the cheeses and their role in the diet?
So cheese plays a huge role, always did, especially in Greece. At some point, I believe we were the highest consumers of cheese, even though you would think the French were, because we eat feta with almost every meal. So feta cheese is just present on the table as if it's bread. So cheese plays a huge role because we eat it with all these vegetable dishes. Yogurt is also a constant. We consume it here more so. I remember my grandparents who lived till they were 100. They would consume yogurt after the meal because they felt it helped them digest better. In any case, yogurt is consumed here, twice a day. This is not only, again, the location. We did have a lot of sheep's milk yogurt, and that is still present in Greece, but also cow's milk yogurt. So those two foods are very much part of the Mediterranean diet. And we can talk about probiotics too that were present and are present in the yogurt, which also plays a role in the health benefits that we see with this diet.
Yeah, I love yogurt, and I love all of the probiotics in them that really help our system with digestion. That's interesting. They ate the yogurt after the meal, and so really it isn't so much of goat cheese or sheep milk versus cow. It's more just your location. So here, where we don't have as much of the feta and some of the goat milk products, the cow's milk products are completely acceptable as well.
This diet truly is a lifestyle, and I love that naps are part of it, because I love a nap on a weekend, just since I don't get to take a nap during the week. But it also talks, and you made reference to that, about exercise. So, Elaine, in your own personal life, what kind of exercise, or even your family in general, what's a common practice with your exercise with the Med diet?
Well, we walk a lot, as much as we can, although I do have to add that now, in the larger cities, in Greece and in the Mediterranean in general, people are having, they're using their cars more often. But you do see, especially the older generations. I live in a suburb, but almost every suburb in Athens, even if it's a bit more further away from the center, they all have local small supermarkets, and they all have farmers markets twice a week. And this can be an affluent suburb, or it might not be such an affluent suburb. They all have farmers markets. And you see people, especially older people, walking to these markets and getting their food and walking back home. And every day they'll go to the small market, the small supermarket, to get some other things. So there's a lot of walking, even at a very old age. A second thing we often do, especially in the summer, we take walks after our dinner. So it's like, again, so we can digest, let's say. So these are little practices that everybody does of every age.
So it's almost more a lifestyle, a cultural experience with the whole Mediterranean diet commitment.
Yeah, and I love that it's so varied. And I think that's a key. It's so hard if you're cutting out an entire food group to stay on a diet. So I suspect part of it is there's just such a wide array of things to choose from on the diet, and the whole lifestyle that goes with it. I can see why it's remained very popular. For the listeners, could you give them just a few ideas on potentially what a breakfast, lunch, or dinner would look like? I know you talked about the cauliflower and tomatoes, but just a few other ideas if they wanted to try to incorporate more of the Mediterranean diet into their life.
So breakfast generally is not very large on the Mediterranean diet. We usually have some sort of like mid-morning snack. So we might have coffee, which I should add, Greek coffee, or it's also known as Turkish coffee. This is a type of coffee that is boiled in a pot, has actually, it is high in antioxidants, And it is one of the beverages that we've seen in the blue zones on the island of Ikaria, which is one of a Greek island. But all Greeks consume this type of coffee. It's very high in antioxidants. So, that might be worth something to look at. You can get this type of coffee at Amazon or some grocery stores that have ethnic products.
And
so we will start with.
What is it called again?
It's Greek coffee.
Just
it's Greek coffee or
okay.
Turkish coffee.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting. Okay.
So, and it's mild, even though it seems it's served in a small cup like an espresso, but it's actually a mild coffee. So we might start with that or a herbal drink. And that's another superfood that I would say is in the Mediterranean diet. We drink a lot of like chamomile, thyme, but we also drink this tea called mountain tea, which is present in most of the Mediterranean. And these teas have been shown to be high in antioxidants as well. So that's another, and we drink these summer and winter, not just when we're sick. So you might have something like that if you don't want to have caffeine or coffee. For breakfast, so there might be a slice of bread and some cheese and maybe some olives. So kind of staying away from that sweet breakfast. Or we might have some yogurt with some walnuts and some fruit and maybe a bit of honey if you'd like to consume something that has dairy. Some people do not, but that is something also consumed for breakfast. Mid-meal, we might have something like a pita, but pita in Greek means pie, like so spinach pie. Spinach pie is often consumed for breakfast, or cheese pies. So these are pies made with like filo. I don't know if you've heard of the like very thin layers, like a crust, but it's very soft. And it's low carbohydrate. And we fill that with seasonal vegetables, spinach, greens. Sometimes it's only cheese, zucchini. There's a wide variety of these pies. So often you'll find in the bakeries, actually in any bakery in Greece, you'll find this. You'll find a variety of these pies. And people will have that as a mid-morning snack. Now, lunch is consumed later than it is in the US. So lunch is consumed around 2. And that is the largest meal of the day, which I recommend. It is good to have your larger meal earlier in the day. We do see health benefits and weight loss when we have that kind of eating pattern. And the mid-meal will either be a vegetable casserole, such as peas or green beans or the cauliflower with bread and cheese. If you are eating meat or fish on that day, you may have fish with salad and some bread, or you may have chicken, which is usually cooked in tomato sauce or roasted with lemon and oregano. And again, that is always accompanied with some sort of vegetable. And then for dinner, we might have something lighter. It might just be a smaller portion of lunch, or it might be, believe it or not, eggs. So eggs in the Mediterranean are consumed more as a small meal rather than for breakfast. So you might have an omelet or a fried egg in olive oil with a salad and some bread, or again, yogurt. That is a very common evening meal in Greece. Yogurt with, fruit, or my grandparents used to put pieces of bread in the yogurt and had more of a savory type of meal. So that's kind of what a typical day on the authentic Mediterranean diet would look like.
So I wanted to test if you practice what you preach, but because you keep saying we, I think you do. But have you always, culturally and because of where you grew up, it makes sense, have you always followed the Mediterranean diet?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. I was born there. So I was fortunate that my mom really preserved these recipes that she learned from her mother. And so she cooked very much Greek when I was growing up. We did move to Greece for a while. And there I had the opportunity to just experience firsthand my grandparents and uncles and aunts who lived in these villages. These people lived until they were 100. And they lived in their homes until their death. So they had good lives, and I experienced what they were doing as well. So I've been raised on this diet. I've been following this diet my whole life.
That's awesome.
And
awesome.
yes.
And there's one thing we didn't mention, and I saw when I was reading about it that it's included, and I wanted to ask you about red wine in the diet. I saw that the Mediterranean diet, and I think that may increase its popularity a little bit too, that alcohol is not totally eliminated from this diet. Tell us a little bit about the reasoning behind that.
So we do know from research that red wine is a source of antioxidants. Now, how it is consumed, though, in the Mediterranean is always with food. So you will never just drink alcohol. Alcohol in general is always served with food. So that is one thing that is very important. And it is consumed in moderation. You are not consuming to get drunk. You are consuming wine to increase the pleasure of the meal. Having said that, we do know from research that some people should not be drinking alcohol. It can increase their risk based on their genetic makeup. So if you are not drinking alcohol and you want to start a Mediterranean diet, I would not recommend that you start drinking alcohol. You can follow a Mediterranean diet without the wine. But if you are, just make sure that you are consuming in moderation and always with food.
But you do need the dark chocolate, right? No, just kidding.
We absolutely need that. No, my taste buds have just been ready. Just talking to you and hearing you describe this whole lifestyle. I'm not going to call it a diet anymore. But Elena, where can individuals get more information after they listen to this and realize how amazing this experience is, this lifestyle adjustment when it comes to food and drink? Where should they go?
Well, they can visit my site, which is olivetomato.com. Those are my two favorite ingredients, olive oil, and tomatoes. I have a wide variety of recipes, tips, menu plans, and so they'll get a lot of articles on how to start the diet. You know, small ways you can tweak your eating habits and transition easily and slowly to this diet without feeling like you're making a big change. So I do talk a lot about research, but the main part of that site is practical recipes, information about olive oil, information about the diet. And I'm also on social media. Like I mentioned, I'm on TikTok. They can find me there. My username is Mediterranean Diet, so they can't miss me. Also on Instagram and Facebook. And they can, if they would like, they can get my book. It's available in all bookstores in the US. And it does include a 2-week menu plan where one can get an idea of what they're supposed to do. And there are 100 recipes there, many of them handed down by my family.
So cool.
nice.
And what's the name of your book?
Do you happen to have a copy of it there?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
The book is called The Mediterranean Diet Cookbook for Beginners. And there are a lot of copycats out there. So just make sure it's written by me, because once a book starts selling very well, there are a lot of people who may copy the cover or, try and make it look like it's the same book.
And I did purchase the book, but it has not yet arrived. So I was going to bring it today, and it didn't come in before I had to leave and come over to the studio. So, yeah, it looks like it is an amazing book. Any second books in your future?
There's something going on in the background, but yes, not yet.
And when we talked earlier, and this is just a random question, I know you have 2 teenage boys. How do they do eating the Mediterranean diet? Any tips for individuals with teenagers?
Yes. I mean, we've been, they've been eating this type of food since they started eating solid food. So my tip would be that a lot of parents have a difficulty getting their kids to eat vegetables. That is one of the main complaints I hear. And what I've noticed and I think this goes for adults as well, is cook your vegetables, cook them in olive oil, and you'll see, because when you cook vegetables in olive oil and you simmer it, these vegetables take less space, they cook down, which means that a child can eat more of them. And it tastes much better because you have that olive oil. And if you give them some bread and some cheese, any vegetable becomes delicious when it's cooked this way. And I just want to add, because we eat cooked vegetables, in Greece, still to this day, we are the highest consumers of vegetables, especially older generations. They eat about a pound of vegetables a day.
Wow.
And that happens
Wow.
because they cook it.
Huh.
Wow.
Well, this has been really fascinating. Anything we left out that you'd like to mention about the Mediterranean diet?
I think your questions were great. I think we covered most of the information. But again, if anybody has any questions, they can find me on my site and send me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions they might have about this diet
Elena, this was
or
fascinating.
this lifestyle.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Elena. Great information and great resources for our listeners. And we look forward to talking to you again. And hopefully I'll get to meet you live in person one of these days.
Yes.
So
Yes.
thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.